Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present our group's findings and recommendations regarding the U.S.-India foreign policy relationship. Group members are myself, Jeff Seymour, Joe Garcia, Joshua Kennedy, Azza Abdallah, and Richard Dantzler. Group discussions focus on five key components of the history and projected future of the U.S.-India foreign policy framework, including the history of the relationship to date, current economic and cultural engagements, joint efforts by both nations in relationship to regional and international security, India's participation in regional and international organizations, and a framing of priorities for the U.S.-India relationship moving forward. Our group sees four major themes related to the relationship between the U.S. and India. One is a joint and mutual desire to counter China's influence in the regional and international stage. Second is an opportunity for both nations to engage in closer cooperations through economic partnerships. Third is the U.S.'s view of India as a strategic partner rather than an ally. And fourth is India's continuation of decision-making frameworks through a lens of strategic autonomy. As a primer on the history of the U.S.-India relationship, India's independence in 1947 followed approximately 200 years of British and British East India Trading Company's occupation of the Indian subcontinent. India's independence in August of 1947, as a newly formed democratic state, was part of a two-state solution for the subcontinent, dividing the region into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. Disputes over territory control and borders, particularly between India and Pakistan, have continued into the modern era. India has historically strived to strike a balance of strategic autonomy with both the West and other international powers, including China and Russia, throughout the modern era. This autonomy has led to periods of chilly relationships between the U.S. and India, but also opportunities by the U.S. to use India as a stabilizing force in the Indo-Pacific region. While the U.S. has faced certain challenges with India related to foreign policy, most notably India's independent development of nuclear weapons technology against U.S. wishes, the two nations have worked together more closely in recent years on mutually beneficial economic development programs. These partnerships have included the importation of American agricultural principles to India in the early 1960s, leading to the spurring of a food production revolution and the joint development by 9 American universities of the Indian Technological Institute, spurring the development of India's modern IT technology cluster and technology cluster infrastructure. Additional partnerships between the two nations have included space technology and growing partnerships in the military development arena, which will be described in more detail in later parts of this presentation. Overall and growing themes of the U.S. relationship with India include the U.S.'s desire and India's desire to better balance our joint relationship with India compared to our historic relationship with China, where India has felt historically undervalued. It's important to note that where the U.S. can sometimes view India as a second or third tier international actor, India views their leadership on the international stage as on equal footing with other world powers. The U.S. continues to work to balance India's desire for autonomy, as noted on the previous slide, related to nuclear weapons development, while also looking to India as a strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. balances these relationship dynamics against the desire for formalized international standards related to weapons development, testing, and oversight. The U.S.'s desire to continue to develop stronger economic ties as the Indian economy grows continues to create more mainstream economic partnerships. An example of these new partnerships are the 2007 Mangoes for Motorcycles trade deal that more fully opened U.S. channels for importation of Indian ag products and Indian importation of automotive technology. The U.S. also continues to have to navigate the balance of our relationship with India in comparison to our modern relationship with Pakistan. This has proven particularly difficult in the Modi era, where the administration has taken a strong Hindu nationalist tact that has a challenge track record related to Islamic human rights. Finally, I'll note India's concerns that while the U.S. continues to work alongside them to balance Indo-Pacific relationships, particularly with China, that America's overall focus on internal priorities could leave India stranded as it works to balance relationships with other international powers, including Russia. With that, I'll hand the conversation over to Joe to talk about current economic and cultural partnerships between the two nations.
Hello, everybody. Joe Garcia. I'll be going over question two. So, regarding the political relationship, let's look over both the Trump administration and the Biden administration. So, during the President Trump's time in office, he really had raised a lot of disagreements, whether it's publicly, which he did quite often, and or privately with meeting with Minister Bodie. Uh, a lot of these issues were regarding trade, climate change, visas, but they were often sidelined publicly to emphasize strengthening their defense and partnership cooperations. Some other key things to note are going to be the U.S. and Indian leadership signed the Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement, or COMCASA, which gave India access to advanced communication technology used in the United States. And this was between both countries. Um, the Trump administration also terminated India's preferential trade status, which was giving developing countries a U.S. market duty, or to the U.S. market duty free. Basically, Trump said, "Hey, you know what, India, you're not really providing equitable and reasonable access to your own markets, so we're going to take that away from you." And this is something that tied back to the 1970s. With that in mind, um, India's response to this was, slapping tariffs on over 28 different U.S. Products in response to that. And lastly, top U.S. and Indian defense foreign affairs officials signed an intelligence sharing agreement during third round of the 2+2 dialogue, and this was the Basic Exchange of Cooperations Agreement, or BECA. So this was during the Trump administration. Uh, the best way I can talk about um, the Biden administration is going to be through the 2013, or excuse me, the 2023 meeting that the Indian Prime Minister went and visited the White House. So they, after several days of meetings, the Indian Prime Minister and President Biden left this meeting with several priorities. One being technology. U.S. officials, along with Indian leadership, announced that the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology. This was an agreement aimed towards expanding bilateral technology and defense cooperation, provisions of weapons, artificial intelligence, and this was something that was strategically done in effort to, you know, launch more trade dialogue, and also this was an effort to kind of touch on the relationship between India and Russia, because India at the time is still seeking arms from Russia to supply their military. Uh, During this meeting, they adopted the Defense Industrial Cooperation Roadmap, which would provide policy direction to defense industries and enable co-production of advanced defense systems and collaborative research. Again, it's really strengthening defense efforts between these two countries without really acknowledging, international humanitarian issues, which I'll go a little bit further into later, or climate change. So, to question though, is this something of tension, of cooperation? There is a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of opportunity for these two countries, for the United States and India. However, there is still a lot that is not recognized, with the effort of hoping to keep um, keep the relationship going without really moving on to acknowledging these issues. So first being the India is very strong and playing the playing field. They carefully manage the relationships between Saudi Arabia, Israel, Iran, the Palestinian territories, Russia, the United States, and really being more pragmatic in their efforts. Um, the U.S. again recognizes, uh, India's or recognizes India's weaker decarbonization target, without, and still continues to bypass the issue altogether over itself. And to briefly touch on China and Russia, um, there's still an ongoing Chinese India border issue between their two militaries getting in the way of each other's patrolling. This was China's effort to push forward on what that border looked like. So there's some tension there. Doesn't stop their relationship very much at all, though. However, Russia and India continue to get and to engage in multinational, non-Western, trilateral and multilateral forums. Their relationship with BRICS as a a big issue with pushing that towards for the United States is the de-dollarization effort that is being pushed with BRICS. And India continues to not condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and today they still continue to buy Russian oil during this conflict. So again, they're on the fence. No matter what the efforts are thus far between the past two administrations, they're still remaining on the fence and being very pragmatic in their play. And moving on to the economic and cultural relationship, right? So, to briefly go over the um, Indian economic or economy, excuse me, it's one of the faster growing economies in the world, and the United States has taken advantage of that, both politically and economically. A lot of their a lot of their economic efforts are going to be tied very politically, right? So there's a lot of opportunities that come from that. So during the fiscal year, India received several foreign direct investments, and amounting to over $6.04 billion, and this is in US dollars, with the United States being the third biggest source. Again, there's opportunity there. Some of the leading sectors are going to be, and this is outlined in that picture in the top left there. As you can see, the pictures explain this best. But to briefly touch on that, some aerospace, defense, information communication, technology, the chemical industry there is massive, and what their products are. And it's going back to the opportunities, right? The U.S. market shares, or the U.S. market share of India's energy-related equipment is relatively low. India has instituted economic reforms to improve the business environment. However, there's still very strong. There are still very strong protectionist measures favoring Indian made. One of the biggest opportunities for economic growth is going to be in the next decade in developing a globally competitive manufacturing hub and making that India, moving away from China and making that India. It's going to, again, by doing this, there's potential to um, bring India closer to the United States and our allies as well, and getting it further away from China and Russia. And now touching on the cultural relevancy, one of the biggest issues raised with this is, well, there's two. One being some claim, with the multi-Muslim sentiments have heightened under the leadership of Modi, um, and his leading party, pursuing a Hindu nationalist agenda. You got to keep in mind the Muslim minority group is actually the largest minority group, with over 15% of the GDP in India being Muslim. And as far as discrimination goes, there's continued fights in their Muslim communities, trying to keep themselves safe. Again, trying to get away from that Hindu nationalism, and more specifically, in December 2019, Parliament passed and Modi signed the Citizenship Agreement Act, which was allowing a fast track of citizenship for Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, and Parsi or Christian of migrants from countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, and completely leaving out anybody who was Hindu, or excuse me, anybody who was Muslim, which again is not very fair or right. So thank you very much. I look forward to our team effort, and I will be passing it on. Thank you.
Hello, class. My name is Josh Kennedy. I research the national security relations between the United States and the Republic of India. As my fellow group members have already conveyed, the partnership between the two nations have greatly strengthened and expanded the past few years. This expansion is not just recognized in economic terms, but also with reference to the two nations' defense sector. The national security apparatus of the United States has seen more cooperation, collaboration, and bilateral partnerships with India across a wide range of critical issues. In my research, I focused on the military, intelligence, and high-tech aspect of the American national security apparatus, as well as some bilateral agreements. These aspects also, however, include some tensions. Furthermore, the increased cooperation in the two nations' strategic partnership is largely due to the shifting geopolitical situation in the Indo-Pacific, where China has become a more dominant economic and military state actor. This shift in balance of power can create regional instability, as China can assert more influence throughout the Indo-Pacific region through peaceful or coercive measures. Thus, the United States has a national security interest in seeing that China is not emboldened to take escalatory actions that threaten stability, peace, and security in the region. Thus, India has been a strong candidate to partner with to address the rise of China. As mentioned by another group member earlier, the economic relations between the two nations have grown and strengthened. The aid and technical assistance given to India to promote development and infrastructure investment does not just mutually help the United States economically, but military as well. A more educated and healthy Indian population means a stronger strategic partner. Regarding the military, India and US have seen more cooperation. To put this in a better perspective, 20 years ago, there was no US defense sales to India, but in the present time, the defense sales have not only grown large, but both nations are working together to develop 21st century defense systems and weapons. Now, regarding intelligence, the issues and threats of the 21st century are more globalized. Some of these threats include terrorism, climate change, cyber attacks, nuclear weapons proliferation, and pandemics. All of these necessitate a level of cooperation. Thus, India and the US have worked together to address these issues that are of a direct threat to each other's national security. Now, regarding high tech, the evolving and improving nature of technology in this era is unique to years past. Modern technology, like AI, is a global threat, which must require global cooperation. Also, India has a strong IT sector where significant technological innovation is often found. Thus, it would be wise for the US to partner with India to research and share technological innovations for the growth and improvement of each other's economic and military sectors. Now, regarding security ties, both nations have signed numerous bilateral agreements to address the 21st century issues that threaten US and Indian interests. However, the US and India do not have a mutual defense treaty. In fact, India has never joined a formal defense treaty, largely due to the fact that since their founding, they've had a history of non-alignment, which plays into the last aspect of my research, which is the tensions. India is a more neutral, non-aligned nation that seeks to work with many nations, which may not particularly be allies with the US, like Russia and Iran. This non-alignment, as well as its recent democratic backsliding, has negative implications for the foreign policy approach of the US, as it becomes harder to cooperate on the international stage when certain values or goals do not align. There are a few key military aspects to point out. First, the US and India work together in Quad, which is a strategic security dialogue amongst them two, as well as Australia and Japan. This multilateral forum allows for Indo-Pacific security cooperation. Also, G7, which India has been consistently invited to recently, which shows something, deals with security issues as well, like with climate change. These two forums are better explained by another group member later on. Furthermore, India also has nuclear weapons, so it is vital to work together to promote responsible nuclear policy and prevent nuclear proliferation. Besides nuclear weapons, India has also modernized the military capabilities by being the world's largest arms importer, where the US sends the second most arms. Some US exports to India include howitzers and attack helicopters. Furthermore, the US and India conduct joint military exercises like Vajra Prahar that seeks better operational tactics and mission planning of nations' special forces. Another exercise mission is called Sea Dragon. It's a naval exercise that would much be relevant in any Indo-Pacific conflict. And there are a few key high-tech aspects to point out. The US and India have started to cooperate more closely on space matters. This includes coordination for defense of the Earth in case of asteroids or near-Earth objects. Cooperation is also seen with joint working groups geared towards space exploration, spaceflight, and satellites. Furthermore, India has lagged in jet technology, and the US recently signed an historic agreement to transfer jet engine technology to India for their Air Force. And lastly, for the technology, India has a strong IT sector, and they've begun to work more closely together in telecommunication for 5G, quantum technologies, as well as cooperation in certain resources that are critical for the security of the US and India in the 21st century. This is especially important at a time when US is trying to offshore and get imports from places other than China on key materials. And as far as clean energy goes, both nations have conducted joint research to promote a sustainable future. With regards to intelligence, the US and India have also worked collaboratively to target terrorist activity, cyber attacks, maritime attacks, transnational crimes like drug and arms smuggling, as well as Chinese aggression. For example, the US gave unprecedented US intel to India that helped repel Chinese military incursion into a contested border territory by the Himalayas. This was the most detailed and quick real-time information that the US has ever shared with the Indian military. Also, India and US have shared intelligence for maritime security within the Indian Ocean, more recently with the Houthis. The Indian Ocean may become more valuable due to the strategic importance of the trade route. Also, Operation Broader Sword is a cooperative initiative among various federal agencies on both sides to combat drug smuggling of very dangerous drugs. So the intelligence sharing is done by law enforcement on both sides. Lastly, there are various bilateral agreements done that help strengthen the national security of both nations. All of the ones listed further enhance the security of both nations somehow via trade, research, investment, co-production, intelligence sharing, promotion of innovation, and the diversification of supply chain. The goal is to promote dialogue and innovation in every important sector of society that enhances security. These bilateral agreements help build trust beyond just military deals. For example, ICET, which brings the two nations closer together beyond military to cooperate in developing fields of technology like AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing. Also, the last point on India being a major defense partner is crucial. This is due to the United States-India Enhanced Cooperation Act passed by Congress in 2020. It designated India as an MDP, which further increases the defense relationship of the two. That act is one of the most, if not the most important acts that deals with the U.S. security relations with India. And finally, as far as tensions, India needs a lot of oil, and so they import a lot, and a lot of it comes from Russia and Iran, which are adversaries. Furthermore, India has abstained from voting in the UN on a resolution to condemn the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And India also buys a lot of military from Russia. So in all, India has struggled also to uphold the democratic norms, which come in contact with the values of the West. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Aza, and I'm going to answer question 4, and I'm going to cover question 4 on this PowerPoint. Okay, so India is a part of the member of the Quad, and the Quad brings up 4 countries. One of them happens to be India, Australia, Japan, and the US. So they work together to make an inclusive environment for Indo-Pacific people. So India does create loopholes when it comes to the economic sanctions in Russia. For example, they purchase Russian oil, for example, and at discounted prices. And usually in the context of concerns of a global food crisis, India has announced that there are going to be strict exports when it comes to wheat in order to put priority on domestic supply. Also, it is natural. Also, it is natural for the US to have more frustration with India when it comes to the exportation because they blatantly have their own natural interest. Okay, so for question 4, one of the questions is what is India saying about the US position when it comes to Israel and Hamas? So India actually has a long history when it comes to supporting Palestinians, whereas the US does not. Okay, so India was actually furious when it comes to New Delhi and not supporting the General Assembly resolution calling out for a ceasefire in Gaza. So the amendment, however, was unable to secure the necessity when it comes to the two-thirds majority. India's foreign policy has included decades of support for the Palestinians. So, for example, the Liberation Organization. So the Liberation Organization in 1974, and as well as they were one of the first nations to actually accept the establishment of Palestine state in 1988 when it was Israel at the time. So second follows India's request when it comes to a permanent position in the UN Security Council. So by requesting India a position in the UN Council, it can actually be very beneficial because they'll be able to veto and it will give them the ability to shape the UN's decisions when it comes to suiting its interest. Also, possessing a veto can actually put an end to China's support when it comes to Pakistan's UN advocacy for the Kashmir, I believe, issue. And also, India will be equal to a footing with China when it comes to representing its interests at the UN nations. Also, China's ambitions in Asia will be undermined by the growth of India's global political influence. So the meeting that they held, the meeting that they established recently was between India, the US, and UAE, and many more. And they were talking about their goals, the SDGs, which is the Substantial Development Goal. And G7, they do hope to mobilize about $600 billion in infrastructure investments towards in India, where there is projects within health, telecommunications, renewable energy, and that's something that's going to be very beneficial within India's climate change. Okay, so the question is, what is India doing with the nuclear weapons? So for one, what they're doing with it is they have raised money to support India's low carbon transition. So with respect of the nuclear science and technology, including nuclear power, India has continued to emphasize the importance of the agency's role, which is to properly have training programs and also specialists and equipment at the agency to progress. Also, the organization or the AIEA, that it's really hard to pronounce. The IAEA received about $50,000 a year from India, which is one of the founding members of the international project of innovative reactors and fuel cycles. Also, with India, they signed a safeguards agreement, and that agreement includes, it started in May 11th of 2000. Yeah, so this agreement, it ensures that everything is going to be intact when it comes to the where the money is going to be spent and how it's going to be used.
Hello, this is Richard Dantzler, presenting for the India Group, and I've been tasked with outlining the strategic projections for the overall foreign policy between the U.S. and India. Throughout my portion of today's briefing, I'll provide a culminating summary of the various lines of effort that will ultimately feed into a comprehensive way ahead to improve relationships between our diplomatic representatives in the U.S. and their constituents in India. So with that, I'd like to orient you to the slide before you now, which categorizes key components of the strategy based on scope of influence. And of course, the primary objectives are highlighted in light red as well, with the various factors to be addressed within each line of effort listed in the columns. So amongst the group members, we have identified these key areas that will facilitate a holistic path of improvement for US-India collaboration over the next 5 to 10 years. So now we're going to just address each of these columns and dive a bit more deeply into what each of these lines of effort entail. So regarding defense and security, given the strategic importance of both the United States and India in the Indo-Pacific region, fostering a robust defense partnership and enhancing security cooperation between the two countries is very essential for maintaining that regional stability and addressing common security challenges as well. So we've also highlighted trade and commerce, moving on to the next column, as an area to focus strategic efforts, because strengthening economic ties and promoting bilateral trade and investment between these two countries is very crucial for driving economic growth as well as prosperity for both countries specifically. So by leveraging their complementary strengths, as well as addressing different trade barriers that might exist between the two or amongst the two countries, the two nations can unlock new opportunities for businesses, create jobs, and even stimulate innovation in key sectors such as technology, manufacturing, and consumer services. So moving on to diplomatic cooperation. In terms of diplomacy, our team has covered the various involvements of the US and India have had within multilateral alliances such as the Quad, of course, including Japan and Australia, global or international organizations such as the UN, and even forward-looking initiatives like the periodic G20 conferences and other panels and discussions as well that warrant strategic involvement and collaboration. Now, with that being said, for the two of the world's largest democracies, when you look at the United States and India, they have a shared commitment to upholding these democratic values and addressing global challenges such as climate change, cybersecurity, and of course, the ongoing battle of counterterrorism, right, and violent state actors, things of that nature. Now, elevating diplomatic engagement between the two countries can definitely facilitate closer coordination on these issues, which will enable them to work more effectively to advance these shared interests and promote international peace and security as a result. Moving on across the science and technology space, we have discovered the need for collaboration on academic and private business sectors as well. So, as mentioned, gatherings similar to the G20 conference has and will continue to bring the importance of driving economic growth and addressing societal changes to the top of mind for global leaders. And by taking a more prominent role in the international discussion regarding these matters, the US and India can foster greater collaboration in areas such as research, development, and technology transfer. And lastly, but certainly not least, we do have a list of opportunities that will encourage collaboration and drive impact at a civil and cultural level as well. Now, of course, of the items listed, we have captured the need for human rights advocacy. And I do foresee that as being an area that might experience the lowest pace of movement, mainly due to the various human rights concerns that actually exist on both sides of the US-India partnership. From, when you look at India, you think about the religious and caste-based discrimination that is, deeply rooted within that country. But on the US side of things, we also have numerous concerns regarding our immigration policy and criminal justice reform, criminal justice reform as well. But aside from these heavier items of discussion that have, been ongoing, other term items such as the establishment of civil exchanges in the areas of academia and even media would be a lighter lift in comparison, and would hopefully lead to expanded cultural awareness and improved relations between the country's respective leaders and their populations as well. Each of these categories is equally crucial to enhancing foreign relations between the US and India. In terms of execution, now the application of efforts towards each priority will have to be outlined through intentional, consistent, and strategic dialogue in hopes of instilling trust and transparency between the two parties. On this next slide, I will refine this overarching model down to a proposal that maps out how leaders may want to actually prioritize the implementation of this strategy. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. All right, so the title, of course, proposed action steps and key takeaways. On this slide, I have depicted 4 primary action steps that should rank fairly high on the agenda for enhancing US-India relations. Of course, in the top left sector, we see, peacekeeping and stabilization in the Pacific region regarding denuclearization or nuclear stabilization, rather, in territorial conflicts, whether they be state to state, non-government sponsored, different actors and militias and all these various different types of conflicts that affect that region specifically. Of course, that has high urgency, but also the risk of complexity and things of that nature is very high as well. Looking at all the other sectors as well, they each have their own level of urgency, and they each have their own implications in terms of risk and the subsequent difficulty or complexity due to the nature of each mission set. And for each of these key steps, the arrow towards the bottom of the slide highlights the standard set of activities that, if followed, will ensure that the proper efforts are allocated to each objective, which will be subject to review and recalibration at 4-year intervals. So, without getting into each of these, because, these have been previously spoken about in the over the course of this presentation, I just want to kind of summarize that the relationship between the United States and India truly does underscore a strategic partnership aimed at addressing shared challenges, managing relationships with international stakeholders, whether it be Pakistan, Iran, other countries in Asia, the Middle East, Russia, and even, when we look at countering China's controversial advancements in the Indo-Pacific region, right? So both nations also recognize the imperative need for closer economic collaboration to bolster growth and stability. It's also crucial to emphasize that while they are not formal allies, their mutual interest does drive collaboration in areas such as defense, security, and technology. India's insistence on maintaining its autonomy as a sovereign nation is balanced with the US's desire to leverage the partnership to advance its agenda across the international arena. So moving forward, navigating these dynamics will ultimately be key to fostering a robust and mutually beneficial relationship between these two influential natures. Beyond this slide right here, on the next two, you will find a list of resources used to compile today's briefing. And in closing, thank you for your time and attention today, Ambassador Sheffer. This concludes my portion and my team's presentation on U.S.-India relations and strategic foreign policy. Thank you.